I think everybody needs to understand it has been a fight. It has been a battle to get in to this position for President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. History has been made. But now what? You can spend a day or two celebrating, but at the end of the day, the question is, where do we go from here? And I'm excited to have on with us tonight Mike Collier. He's an early supporter of Vice President Joe Biden. He has served on his National Finance Committee since September of 2019. In June 2020, Mike was appointed a Biden-Harris campaign senior advisor for Texas. For many years, Mike Collier was a partner in the worldwide accounting firm of PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he provided audit and financial consulting services to major corporations and private equity firms. Today, Mike is a Texas CPA who serves clients on mergers and acquisitions. Mike put his professional career aside in 2014 to run for Texas Comptroller. He ran for lieutenant governor in 2018. That's why that name may sound familiar, and came within 5 points of defeating incumbent Dan Patrick. He is a tireless champion of public education. He and his wife, Suzanne, have 2 grown children, and all 4 of them, plus a daughter-in-law, attended the University of Texas. So I think it's appropriate to say hook 'em horns. Man, welcome Mike Collier to Real World, Real Talk. I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us on tonight.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cofield. First of all, it's good to see you. I'm glad to see that you're looking good, and sounds like you're feeling good. And I'm just very, very happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
Well, I tell you what, Mike, I am feeling better. I have to admit, probably like many in your camp, just the consternation, man, over the last several days, just, like count faster, please count faster. And, some states counted their early votes before Election Day. Some chose to wait until after Election Day. So let me ask first, before we start moving forward in our conversation, any changes in the numbers? Because I'm one of those people. Let me be perfectly honest with you. My celebration, whatever it is, I'm really, really kind of guarded right now. I'm waiting for January 20th. I need to be honest with you.
Well, I mean,
everything that's going on, but any change in numbers or anything that is not being reported in the media right now that brings anything to your mind?
I would guess the answer to that is no. Let me be clear. The Biden team has very, very sophisticated statisticians, and they don't share a lot of those details. They don't share those details with me, so I can't speak on behalf of the campaign. But I can tell you that in 18 months of working with them, they are very, very accurate, and they're also very, very honest. And when Vice President Biden or President-elect Biden came out on election night, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and he said, it looks like we're going to win this. It wasn't being a salesman. It's because his data people knew right down to the county, right down to the precinct in all 50 states where the votes were, how many were mailed in, what about the overseas votes, what about the provisionals. They have a remarkable grasp of the details. They have been telling us consistently that he was going to win. Everything that they said would happen has happened. And so I have no doubt, based on that we will be swearing in Joe Biden for president and Kamala Harris for vice president. Let me back up. Can I just say one thing about Kamala Harris?
Yeah.
Because of all of the excitement about the vote count, and because of Donald Trump and all of our anxieties, we must not forget that we just elected our first woman to the vice presidency, and a woman of color. I mean, when all the dust is settled and we look back on the true and profound significance of this election cycle, I predict that it'll be that more than the momentary crisis that we're going through, that we'll look back on and say, one of the really marvelous aspects of this campaign. So that's a long way of saying, Dr. Cofield, I am highly confident that we have our winner and they'll be sworn in.
Well, I tell you what has been super exciting in the midst of that is just what you just stated, to see the history that has been made. And, regardless of whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, I think hats off to the Biden team for running a tremendously strategic race. I mean, I think in in the case of Hillary Clinton, not that she didn't run a good race, but the strategicness of the race to say, hey, there are certain states, and not just certain states, there are certain counties and there's certain cities that we have to win and or have to do better than. We may not win certain counties, but if we can peel off some of those votes, we can be victorious. And so it's been tremendous to see, to sit there and watch the counts, and because those of us who are on the outside, we're just watching, what's being reported on the news, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, he won Pennsylvania by 700,000 votes. Like, how in the world did that happen? And then every day you just saw that number going down as they started counting the mail-in and provisional ballots. Mike, let's talk about what the president-elect has laid out in terms of his 4 pillars and the things that he is already beginning to address, and why those 4 items are crucially important to him.
Well, yeah, certainly. And before I mention the 4 items, and we'll go through them each one at a time, what I always like to say from a broadest perspective is when he said back in April of 2019, this election is for the soul of the country. That's what attracted me to his campaign. When I saw that, he had that Chancellorsville video.
Yeah.
That terrible day in American history when we had a president who condoned such vicious behavior. And he said, this is for the soul of the nation. And I immediately said, yes, sir, this is for the soul of the nation. And so overarching his 4 pillars, I believe he is very sincere when he says that the most important thing is that we bring Americans back together as Americans and heal our country and deal with the racial division, which has become so awful, and the incivility and the slander and the hate and the anger. So I think that even in dealing with the vote count, as a member of the team, there was constant communication from the center, and what they were saying is, here's what we're going to be telling Americans as this vote count plays out. We're going to be telling Americans that every vote matters, even Republican vote matters, and we're going to do it with confidence, but we're going to do it with humility. Even just reacting to the vote count is starting and setting a message that he does really intend to heal and unite our country. So now, as to the 4 pillars, it's well known on the website: dealing with COVID, dealing with the economy and build back better, dealing with equality, and dealing with climate change. First and most important is COVID. And it's just devastating what's happening. I was just looking at the numbers. The rate of increase in infection is as rapid now as it's ever been, which means that soon hospitals are going to be filling up, soon ICUs are going to be filling up, soon the number of people who pass away is going to start going up. And it's just heartbreaking. And he can't wait until January 20th. And he's not going to wait till January 20th. My understanding is that he's pulling together a team of experts that will have their first meeting tomorrow. And this will be science driven and not shutting things down. I don't believe that that's the right answer, is not shutting things down, but making sure that we invest properly in testing, tracing capability, PPE, and the other things to allow businesses to function and for us to be safe. So look for real leadership starting tomorrow on COVID. We've got to deal with this. And Dr. Cofield, as you know as well as I do, it's not affecting every community equally.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's just unacceptable to Americans. So trust that he understands that he's motivated to do right, and trust that he's going to provide the leadership that we should not be in this jam, but we are, because Donald Trump is incompetent and indifferent. Well, he's gone. And so we'll see that from Joe Biden. That's, and I can move to the next or stop there. It's entirely up to you.
No, I think let's stop there for a minute, Mike, because I think it's important. People, I don't think people have fully grasped the relationship between the pandemic and the economy. I mean, we kind of know it, but it's been amazing how we have tried to move forward in the economy without fixing or getting COVID under control. And so we've kind of been opening it, and you I know you sense it, just the exhaustion of people feeling like, okay, well, we shut down, now we've reopened, now we have to shut down again, now we reopen, when we really didn't shut down like we needed to. And I likened it, to people where you say, hey, I have a fever. And if I have a fever and it's 104, and you say, man, that's dangerous. And so now my fever goes down to 101. So now I'm going to jump up and start going out and playing and doing whatever. It's like, no, I haven't gotten over the virus yet. I haven't gotten over the infection. I still have a fever, and I need to act like I still have a fever. I can't say, oh, well, my temperature is lower now, so I can go about my business just like I've been doing all along prior to getting this fever. And so how does, short of a shutdown, and I know that's not what the president-elect wants to do, how do we move forward with that?
Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the first shutdown and what happened after the first shutdown. We shut down. It was very painful economically. A lot of companies got into trouble. Lots and lots of Americans, lots of Texans lost their jobs, many of which aren't going to come back, and that's a real problem. But the case rates did go down. They went way down. They went down to a level that was so low that it was manageable at that point. But here's what we did terribly, terribly wrong. When the case rates were down, with all that pain that we went through and all those job losses and everything, to get the case rate down, we didn't then do right by having people wear masks, keep their distance, wash their hands, social distancing. It became a political issue. Like some people wore masks, others would laugh at people that wore masks. It's if you wore masks, you were one of them, and so we turned wearing masks and social distancing into a political issue, which meant that all of the good that came from shutting down, most of what happened from shutting down went bad, loss of jobs and so forth. But the good in terms of reducing the virus case rates, that was completely squandered.
Yeah.
It did nothing for us. So when we think, what do we do now? It doesn't make any sense to shut down.
Well, it's almost like we're starting over.
Because when we shut down and come out of it, we're going to be right back where we're standing now. The right answer is to deal with COVID now through our behavior as individuals. People wearing masks, keeping their distance, reinforcing this with good, consistent communication, making sure schools, for example, have enough plexiglass so that the teachers are safe, and all the small things that we do which add up to reducing the case rate. I think shutting down, now this is my personal point of view. We'll hear from the experts tomorrow. My personal point of view is shutting down won't do anything except put us right back to where we started. We must learn to behave differently. And also testing and tracing is a very important part. We need to have more testing, rapid testing, and then we need to have contact tracing so that when somebody is test positive, we can very quickly make the phone calls and get other people to quarantine. So those are the steps we need to take. In my opinion, Dr. Cofield, until we learn to do that, we won't get the economy going again. And the people who are unemployed and worried about taking care of their families are going to be very anxious, and this is going to be very painful. So the first order of business is to get good at beating this virus, not by shutting down, but by behaving properly.
When we looked at New York, which was the first epicenter of this disease, and we saw how Governor Cuomo dealt with it, and he stayed with the facts. His morning press conferences were a refreshing contrast to what we saw in other settings. And he kept on saying, we're going to follow the science. We're going to let the science guide us. And I hear the president-elect saying the same thing, that he's going to follow the science. We're going to let the science guide us. What do you think it's going to take to get those people to believe that this virus is serious, some of whom are still calling it a hoax, some of whom don't, even after 240,000 deaths, still don't seem to get it, that no, this is serious, and we have a vital role to play in whether or not we stay safe in the midst of this pandemic?
Yeah, so that's a very, very important question, Dr. Cofield. And my personal opinion is that when Americans have the right information, they make the right decision. And the Americans have had terrible information.
Mm.
So a consistent, and it's not only consistent messaging around masks, distancing, washing your hands, and so forth. We've had very inconsistent messaging. The fact, for example, that our president, while he was campaigning for office, was running around holding these super spreader events,
Right.
rally after rally after rally. He's sending a message to people: this doesn't matter, it's a hoax, etc. So the messaging has to be very consistent. But the other thing too is data. And that's one of the things very encouraging to me when I read about what Vice President or President-elect Biden is going to do, which is to provide information so that you can show community by community, those communities that are following the guidance are less sick. Those communities that are treating it like a hoax and aren't following the guidance are going to be the laggards, and they're going to be sicker, and they're going to be more in the hospital. And so just giving people really, really good information, localized information, will make a huge difference. And once I do believe, I'm confident, once people believe that this is not a political thing happening, this really is life and death, the patriots in us all, and this is a matter of patriotism because our country is ailing, that people will do right. And that's my prayer.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I don't, if information will change behavior, then good information should produce good behavior.
Right.
And I think you're absolutely right that there has been a problem in the information that has been given regarding the seriousness of this pandemic, how we can, stop it from spreading, the social distancing, the mask, just very simple things that those of us who are listening to the scientists. I know, for example, for me, whenever I'm in a setting with other pastors and they're talking about church and when we're going to reopen, I'm very quick to tell them I've had 2 deaths that are attributed to COVID in our congregation. That's too many.
Right.
I don't want to have any more. And I'm not listening to politicians. I'm listening to the doctors. And I haven't heard one doctor say, yes, let's move forward. Yes, take off your mask. Let's gather
Right.
in these large numbers. And so until the doctors say different, we're going to continue the course that we're on. Let's move forward to this issue of the economy. And
Right.
one of the things that has been, I think, again, some of what we would claim to be misinformation has been this issue of this economic plan. It obviously didn't move enough people to vote for him, but the White House put forth a platinum plan that one commentator called the aluminum foil plan. Um, but there was a concern across the board that other than those who are in the top 1% of wealth in this country, that other people should benefit from being a part of this country and experience the American dream. And so much of that was undermined with the subprime lending fiasco that President Obama had to come in and clean up in 2008. What do you see as some of the key issues? You're a CPA, you're a numbers person. What do you see as some of the key issues that the president-elect needs to address some of the economic disparities in our country?
Well, first of all, Joe Biden, I can't really call him Joe anymore because he's now our president-elect, President Biden. Both President Biden and Kamala Harris were born in very humble circumstances and worked their way up through the working and the middle class. And so they understand and believe that the vitality of the working and the middle class is what really leads to long-term American prosperity. We can't allow ourselves to become a country where the rich are super rich and everybody else struggles. That is not what made America great for many, many years. And they know that. They believe that internally. So what are the things that a president can do in terms of economic policy to strengthen the working in the middle class? First of all, tax policy. We have a terrible deficit, and we've got a lot of really, really wealthy people, our president included, who aren't paying their fair share of taxes. There are programs that we need to fund. Child care is a great example. If you want people to be able to work, child care,
Hey,
education.
Mike Collier, I've got to cut you off there because here's what I need to know. Are you good enough as an accountant to get my taxes down to $750, and everybody else's. I'm just saying, man. When you claim to be worth millions and you pay $750 in tax reportedly, because we haven't seen the tax
Right.
return yet, it's like, wow. So I'm sorry, I had to throw that
No,
in.
no. Well, even if I were the best accountant in the world, I would be unable to reduce your taxes because you, my friend, are an honest man. And there's criminality in Donald Trump not paying $750, in my opinion. But back to the Biden-Harris, the whole idea behind building back better is that, the whole idea is that we need to reward work and not just reward wealth. And so tax policy, all of the programs are going to help the working and middle class. As mentioned, child care is a big one, minimum wage, education, transportation. These are the things that really are going to make a difference in terms of people being able to go out and get a good paying job. And we ought to pay people a living wage. And to the extent the federal government is supporting this effort, those taxes ought to be borne fairly. They should be fair. There shouldn't be any class of taxpayer who's getting a free ride just because they've made campaign contributions to politicians. And I feel very confident that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris understand that. And then if you think about building back better, good paying jobs, first of all, Joe Biden is very pro-union. He's one of the few politicians today who'll stand up and say, we're going to create good paying union jobs. And the reason why he's saying that, in my opinion, is because he knows that we have to look after working men and women, because large corporations will take advantage of them if they're not playing with a strong hand and not pay a living wage. We should raise the minimum wage. We should make sure that people get a living wage. They should be paid time off, sick leave. Make sure that people's retirement is taken care of. Make sure that there's health care that's available to them. These are all programs that are within the reach of the federal government. And if you are a president and you're concerned about the working and the middle class, and you believe that that's important to our long-term prosperity, there are so many of these programs that are available. And this isn't socialism. That's the other thing. They try to paint Democrats as socialism. No, sir. You create a lot of jobs doing it right. And the last thing I'll say on that subject is that if you look at Joe Biden's track record, and I've studied it as carefully as I possibly can, when Barack Obama and Joe Biden were handed a disastrous economy, they built it and created lots and lots and lots of jobs. And they handed to Donald Trump an economy that was booming. And we had just reached the point where we had created so many jobs that incomes in working and middle class families were rising. That's a great place to be. But that wasn't Trump's doing. That was Obama and Biden's doing. He wasn't in there long enough. He actually created, if you look at the numbers, he actually created 18% fewer jobs in his first 3 years than Obama and Biden created in their last 3 years. He'll never admit to that. Right. So I'm highly confident that when it comes to building the economy back better, Joe Biden knows the importance of it, and he knows how to do it. And I'm very enthused. But we have to get COVID taken care of first.
Right. Well, I tell you what, I think what has been tremendous as we've looked at the economy, and I'm glad you mentioned this issue of socialism. One of the things that I have appreciated, even though I didn't agree with it, the characterization of the extremes of the Democratic Party. I think those extremes cost the Democrats some votes. Because when we throw out terms like socialism and Marxism, I don't think most of us even know what real socialism is, right?
Right.
But we have people who are, for example, Latino immigrants who are coming out of countries like Venezuela, coming out of countries like Guatemala, Nicaragua. They lived under what was classified as socialism. And they saw people disappearing in the night. They saw the lawlessness. They have seen in South America, drug cartels have more armament and more powers than local police, and judges being killed, and a lack of safety and community. And so a lot of people were questioning, saying, "Hey, well, why did President Trump carry so much of Florida and and the Cuban, community, the Cuban American community.
Right.
There are so many others. But when you start painting people with that brush called socialism, it's like, no, it's not a cute little term to embrace, to differentiate yourself from somebody else. It's like, no, that's serious business. And people have had family members killed under socialist regimes.
That's right.
And it's important for us to really define the argument, even around this next issue, racial justice, and this term, defunding the police, that has been thrown out there, that I think is a misnomer in many people's eyes, because it doesn't really accurately characterize what we're talking about in terms of police reform,
Right.
and the necessity of police reform.
Right.
Let's talk about the issue of racial justice, if you would.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I'd love to. And before I get to that, one of the things I just wanted to mention is when you're in a moment of great turmoil like we are now, voters, they are trying to decide who to trust more than anything else.
Yeah.
So you see the term socialism, defunding police, which we'll talk about in a minute. Voters are busy in their lives. There's information hitting them from so many different places. They really are trying to decide, who can I trust? And as unbelievable as it may seem, Donald Trump, who is not an honest person, let's be real, he is not an honest person, but he's a very convincing person, which made him a very dangerous person. The whole idea behind the con, some say con, as in con artist, that term is derived from confidence, a confidence man. So Donald Trump is not an honest man, but he's very persuasive. And that made it very difficult. People did think that's, and you can see it in the election results, particularly here in Texas. And then talk about equality and criminal justice and Black Lives Matter. So there's two things that are happening here. And as Biden said, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We want safe communities. We want to make sure that we don't want to defund the police. I mean, people want to feel safe in their communities.
Sure.
But everybody has to feel safe. And that's the key. Everybody has to feel safe. And Black Lives Matter. You could never get Donald Trump to even say those words, because it's a message to his base that he doesn't want to send. You heard Kamala Harris, you heard Joe Biden, you'll hear Mike Collier, and you'll hear us say all day long, Black Lives Matter, because we have a problem. And mothers are terrified and fathers are terrified. And so we have to solve that problem. But that doesn't mean that we defund police or suddenly make our communities unsafe. And that's the key. However, in an election like this last one, with so much money being spent and a president who's not honest, created enormous confusion and concern. And I think there's also concern now that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been elected. Will our communities be dangerous? Are we going to defund police? Now, the good news is they are now elected, and we will see their policies, and we will see that we can trust them. And I'm very, very encouraged by that. And so we can have safe communities, police forces that are properly funded, but also social programs, mental health, for example, and drug programs that are properly funded, and deal with systemic racism, because Black Lives Matter, and we have to solve that problem too.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, everybody does. I heard one commentator say, everybody does a purity test to see who can be a part of their party. And it seems like, for Republicans, you have to be pro-life in order to say you are a Republican. That is the number one purity test. And then for Democrats, you have to believe in the Green Deal, the Green New Deal, and you've got to be a socialist, quote unquote, and far left in order to be considered a Democrat. And I heard a commentator today said, we've got to stop with the purity test. The umbrella is big enough for everybody to get under it,
right?
And to allow people to run on a platform that will allow them to serve their communities specifically, even if it doesn't agree with the national agenda as it's being presented and portrayed. But there's no question,
right,
the messaging has to change. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to 90.9 KTSU. It is 6:32, and I have with me online live Mike Collier, who is the senior advisor to President-elect Joe Biden. Let's move to the last area, and that's climate change. I think it's again a lot of misinformation. I was reading that there are more jobs in Texas that are affiliated with renewable energy than there are affiliated with fossil fuels. And, that story has not been told. And so when you talk
Right.
about, how do we address oil and gas and fracking in some parts of the country and coal and all of those things, that the story has not been told to Texans that, hey, there are more people working in green renewable energy fields than there are working in oil fields right now. How
Right.
do you address climate change? Because before COVID, climate change was the hoax. And now that we're seeing, everybody's like, oh, it's just a hoax. It's just a hoax. Yeah, let's just keep on doing what we're doing. How do you see that playing out as one of the four major pillars of the Biden-Harris team as they move in
Right.
office?
Well, first of all, climate change is real, and even the executives of the oil companies agree with that, and they're making investments to deal with carbon capture. So we have to deal with climate change because we're going to be hit with all sorts of difficulties. It's going to affect agriculture. It's going to affect our global food supply. It's going to affect hurricanes and fires and everything. We've got to do this. We owe it to our children. We owe it to ourselves. Joe Biden thinks that it's an existential threat to humanity, and I happen to agree with it. So good news is we're smart. That's the good news, is we're smart enough to solve this problem. Now, what does that mean for energy in Texas? First of all, Dr. Cofield, I'd like to just let your listeners know that I've made my living in the oil business. I mean, my first job was working for Exxon. And then even though I'm an accountant, my clients have been oil and gas clients. And recently, my clients have been energy and renewable clients. And so the state is moving, with or without Joe Biden, the state is moving in the direction of renewables. The way I would urge people to look at it is this. Look at it from the exact opposite direction. As long as humans are consuming energy, then we in Texas have a vital role to play to supply that energy. First of all, natural gas, which is part of the oil and gas industry, gas is a pretty clean fuel. And we're now able to transport it through the LNG industry by ship to India and all over the world, all over South America and Central America. And you have a lot of coal-fired power generation plants that are old and will be retired. If they're replaced by natural gas plants, that will do very, very good things for our climate. And Texas will benefit from that because that's our gas industry. Even on the oil side of the equation, even if we manage to electrify every vehicle in the country, which would take decades to do, even if every vehicle in the country were electrified, we'd still need liquid hydrocarbons for chemical feedstock, for lubricants, for aviation fuel, for shipping, for national security. So the industry is not going to go away. And when Joe Biden said, I will not ban fracking, but I will invest in renewables, I, as an energy person, see that as a terrific job creator for Texas. And I'm quite confident of that. Now, Biden's opponent tried to scare everybody. That's politics for you. And we know that it worked. We know that a fair number of people, particularly in Southeast Texas, who make their living in the oil business, were worried they're going to lose their job. And it's unfortunate that information, that misleading information was out there. However, Joe Biden won anyway. And that's the good news on so many levels. And now we'll see. And I predict that President Biden will do exactly what he said he will do, which is to invest in renewables, don't ban fracking. And what we'll see 3, 5, 10, 15 years out is that Texas will remain a key contributor to our global energy balance, with lots and lots of good paying jobs and oil coming out of the ground for all the reasons I discussed, and gas coming out of the ground. Last thing I'll say about climate change, because I don't want anybody to think I'm being disingenuous. The key to climate change is making sure for every carbon molecule we put into the atmosphere, we find a way to take that molecule out of the atmosphere. If you do that, you balance it and we solve the problem. And there's lots of work being done on carbon capture, carbon sequestration. And so we'll change our energy mix and move in the direction as our planet grows and energy demand grows. We'll provide more renewables, less on the oil side, plenty of natural gas, and we'll just make sure that for every molecule that goes in, a molecule comes out. And it'll be good news for jobs and for industry in our state. And I'm certain of that. I would not have supported Joe Biden if I didn't believe that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, Mike, is that there's so many people who don't realize the investments that, for example, oil companies are making in these areas as well. And so
That's right.
this is not going on in a vacuum. As much as the fear mongers may throw out there, oh my God, Exxon is gone or Mobil will be gone. It's like, no, they'll adjust, they'll adapt just like they always have, as we have discovered and
That's
developed
right.
other energy sources. Let me change the subject a little bit, Mike, if
Certainly.
you would allow me. And I know
Yeah.
you're a senior advisor here in Texas, and there were some predictions regarding Texas possibly turning blue, and we didn't see that happen. Numbers from the election of President Bush, to Obama, through other elections, including Beto run against Ted Cruz. We saw that number going down more and more. It didn't happen this time. What
Right.
are some of the things that you think we missed here in Texas that caused us to not become the blue state that some had predicted we would?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, I was disappointed. I mean, the most important thing on election night for me was Joe Biden because I felt like Trump would pose an existential threat to our country and our values. So, on balance, I was pretty enthused. I was surprised where the numbers came out on the state house races and the Senate race. Although nothing surprises me, I've run 2 campaigns myself, and the polls are so hard to use a poll to predict what might happen. But I'll say this, I mean, and we're still analyzing the data. But my sense of it, Dr. Cofield, is this: when you have uh, the national contest that's so energizing and so much money pouring into the state, Democrat running for Congress versus Republican running for Congress, Democrat running for the state house versus Republican running for the state house, and you had their campaigns had lots of money, and these PACs and others came in and were buying all sorts of advertisements. The whole election cycle became, and I'll tick off some of these. It became defunding police versus Black Lives Matter, which, as we discussed, the two aren't mutually exclusive, but when you take sort of a national, we were on a collision course with 2 national parties, and there's so much confusion in the air. Are we socialists or are we going to build back better? And there's a whole climate change. Are we going to shut down the oil industry to save the planet? There was such an unbelievable amount of misinformation. And if you turned on the TV and you saw this thing, and it was pretty ugly too. I mean, everybody was really hurling some dreadful things about each other.
Yeah.
And there was just enormous confusion, and people don't quite know who to trust. And I think that had a big impact on the election. I think COVID had an impact on the election. There's no mistaking the fact that Donald Trump, thank goodness he's out of the picture, or at least in his current context, but he had a big impact on the election. When I step back and look at it, and I think now about my broader objective in Texas politics, which is to turn us blue, or at least turn us competitive, I'm not discouraged at all. I start with the proposition that, when Trump won in 2016, he won in Texas by 9 points. Trump only won in Texas by 5.8 points. So that's a very good trend. I also know how people's sentiments are trending because we did very well in 2018. So I think 2020 was just really an outlier election cycle, I would much rather have MJ in the Senate. I would much rather have the Texas House, but that didn't come to pass. But I think the next election cycle, 2022, is going to feel much more normal. The issues we're going to be dealing with are going to be very specific to Texans: public education, healthcare. There won't be a collision course of two great national behemoths and all that money, which creates confusion. I think it'll be much easier for voters to compare and contrast and make a reasonable decision. And I think our progress as Democrats will be very gratifying. So that's my take on it.
Well, I think one of the things that I hope we can get is honest communication. And I'll just use one example. When you have people who say, in certain areas, 80% of them are against the of Obamacare, but 90% of people are in favor of the Affordable Care Act. I mean that messaging, we've got to. It's sad because you may know that it's not a truth, or you may know it's misleading, but you still have to get that positive message out. Let me shift a little bit to the state of Georgia.
Yeah,
um, Without question, Stacey Abrams is being applauded for having registered somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people, and this has been years in the making for Georgia to become arguably minimally purple, if not blue.
right.
Because growing up as a child, there's no way I would have ever thought that Georgia would have been Democratic, or a Democrat, excuse me, state. Let, what do you see coming out of those two Senate races there? And I know there's going to be millions of dollars flooding into Georgia over the next 30 to 45 days as that runoff election is being prepared
Right,
for. I believe it's January 5th is the runoff election.
right.
How important is it to capture those two seats in order for President-elect Biden to be able to do what he feels like is the mandate from the people of the United States?
Yeah, well, I think it would appear as though those two seats could make the difference between Democrats controlling the Senate versus Republicans controlling the Senate. I would much rather have Democrats control the Senate because I'd much rather not have Mitch McConnell control the Senate. I don't think that Mitch McConnell would be anywhere. He's been very, very difficult. We saw how he behaved in the tail end of the Obama Biden administration. I don't think that he will be as difficult when it comes to Joe Biden, simply because Donald Trump just got beat. And so I don't think that they're as feeling as powerful and as strong. But I'd still much rather see Democrats control the Senate. I think there's so many reforms that are necessary that we saw. My personal ambition, for whatever it's worth, is we saw Donald Trump do some things that I thought were unconstitutional, shattered um, democratic norms, stonewalled Congress so that they couldn't provide oversight necessary. I think that's an invitation to corruption. I think ultimately we'll see that there was corruption. If Democrats control the Senate and the House and the White House, then at least for 2 years, we can unearth all that was done during the Trump administration and then pass laws and new framework to make sure that that never happens again. Because I think Trump was a pretty close call in terms of our democracy. In terms of Biden's ambition, his dealing with COVID, build back better, equality, climate change, those are not radical. Those are really quite pragmatic. I think there may be more support in the Senate than we might expect. And plus, Joe has said that his goal is to bring us together, right? So if you have a president who's elected on the basis of unifying the country and he walks down that path, then only the Republicans can prevent it from happening. If the president and the are walking down the path. So whereas I would much rather see Democrats control the Senate, and I'm hoping against hope that on January 5th we have a good outcome as to those two races. And I think I've read that something like $250 million will be spent on it. It's just staggering the amount of money. I'm hoping against hope. I will say to my fellow Democrats, if that doesn't come to pass with a Biden administration, I'm less concerned about the Senate than I have been in the past. even if it remains in Republican control.
So here's a question that I think I want to ask in light of the last time there was a Democratic president and a democratically controlled House and Senate. That was in the first term of President Obama, if I'm not mistaken. And I was privileged to be in a meeting with Nancy Pelosi, and she was very gracious, but she did everything in her power to just not say, "Come on, Mr. President, like let's get this stuff done," and it seemed like the president was more concerned about building consensus than he was about passing legislation and making the changes in government that he had the power to do at that point, having the House and Senate. It cost him in the midterm elections. It cost
Right.
Democrats, and it has never been the same. We saw in the first part of President Trump's administration, he had a Republican House and Senate, but there were certain things that, for whatever reason, he could not get done. And I think some of those things may have been deemed to be somewhat immoral, like let's do away with Obamacare, even though he never presented and still hasn't presented an alternative
Right.
to the Affordable Care Act. What lessons do you think Democrats have learned as we move forward in this new administration? What do you think President-elect Biden has learned from his time as vice president with President Obama that he's going to say, okay, this is not going to happen again?
Well, I would say you got to be aggressive, right? I mean, it's you can be aggressive and bring people together at the same time. You better know what you're doing. You better have policies that make sense. You better be able to go out there and sell it. You better be able to do all the negotiating behind the scenes to get it done. So I think Joe Biden, if you look at the four things that he wants to achieve, each of them, they're really quite pragmatic. Americans will be pleased that we dealt with COVID. He'll be pleased that we built back the economy better. He'll be pleased that we deal with equality. I do believe that, and climate change. So these are very pragmatic, sensible, will be popular, but he better be aggressive to get it done. And there will be an element within the Republican Party that would prefer that he fail and prefer to see him not get anything done, because that's just the nature of politics. I think their party's worse about that than our party. My party's about getting things done. Their party's about preventing things from getting done. And there will be an element in the Republican Party that says, let's find a way to block him, make him fail, then we can be the next president. So Joe and Kamala are going to have to be aggressive.
Yeah.
But the things that they'll be fighting for are really pragmatic and will be quite well received and quite popular. Just take COVID obviously, but Build Back Better. I mean, imagine what it's like for whomever's running, in 4 years from now. I've spent enough time with Joe Biden to think he's got a good 8 years left in him. I don't have any doubt about that. But when somebody's running 4 years from now, imagine what that campaign is going to feel like if we got this economy going again, and if people were confident that the beneficiaries of this were middle-class families.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where you want to be standing 4 years from now. So again, it's a pragmatic approach, but he's got to be very aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike Collier, thank you so much. Senior advisor for the state of Texas to the Biden-Harris campaign, now President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Mike, I really appreciate you taking time on this Sunday evening to be with us. And man, I don't know what you plan on doing. I don't know if there's going to be a move to Washington, D.C. By you and your family, but we certainly have thanked you. I want to thank you for just your path, and you've always been a person who has been of the utmost integrity, just common sense, makes sense. And so I hope there's room for you in the Biden cabinet as things move forward.
Well, that's very kind of you, Dr. Cofield. We have a lot of work to do here in Texas when it comes to criminal justice reform and when it comes to education. So we'll see. There's the man upstairs decides what I shall be doing, and he hadn't told me yet.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mike Collier.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I'm really grateful and thankful for Mike Collier and him sharing tonight. I think in the midst of the excitement, we all need to realize that we've got work to do. I mean, we've got a lot of work to do in this country. And I will say this, and this may be a controversial statement for some of you, but I want you to hear me out. I want to say thank you to President Donald Trump. And I want to say thank you to President Trump because we needed in the African American community somebody like President Donald Trump to kick us in the behind and to get us off the seat of do nothing. We have told the civil rights stories far too long. We've told stories of fighters, but we have not been fighters. We have not been warriors. We have been, in a very real sense, a generation of zoo-raised lions. We have been waiting to be fed. We have not gone out and hunted on our own. And so to see the numbers of people who were inspired and motivated and the people who went out and voted, it was absolutely tremendous. And to hear the spark and fire in our community, especially among millennials and Gen Zers, it's an exciting time to be alive. Now let's make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities that we have been given. I'm Dr. DZ Cofield. You've been listening to Real World, Real Talk on Houston's member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz, The Choice, 90.9 KTSU. I want to thank those of you who have been listening on KTSUradio.com. Let me apologize for any technical difficulties. We're going to get it straight, get it right, but let's keep on fighting. Remember the late Vernon John. He said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. We've got a fight. It's already gotten started. Let's keep our hands up and let's keep on throwing punches until we get to the promised land. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World, Real Talk. If you missed a show, visit KTSUradio.com and listen to the podcast. We hope today's show has inspired